Tales from the Mind. The valley itself was lush, with long, quiet roads winding through the pine-covered forests. The gas station sat atop of a long hill that led out of a sleepy little town below. You could see it, even smaller in the distance, a relic of time when everything wasn't as connected as it is now. The creatures broke from the tree line, moving faster than would seem to be natural. There was no cover between the gas station and the woods, but there was very little in this world that they feared. Their clothing betrayed their once human nature. Jeans, t-shirts, skirts hung off their gaunt frames and they kept moving, their animalistic grunts and whines back and forth, seemingly as a form of communication. They crossed the 100 yards quickly. They could smell the blood in the air. It was what drove them forward, what overtook them. Their need to feed, the hunger, the bloodlust. It was at that moment that the sun began to peek over the mountains in the distance, cutting through the late evening and early morning fog. But the creatures, they didn't seem to notice. They were hungry. They hadn't eaten in weeks. They neared the old station, and the grass gave way to the cracked pavement. Vines and weeds had begun to climb up the old walls as the earth worked to reclaim that which was due. Rotten wood and rusty metal containers showing the passing of time, of disuse. Faded ads still offering discount prices on soda and hot dogs. The monsters slowed. Their steps quieted as they grew closer to their prey, arching their long necks, sniffing the air. They began to circle the building, trying to surround that which they sought. Their eyesight had already begun to dim in the growing light, but one stopped. It could just make out their prey on the far side of the parking lot. A humanoid shape wearing a poncho leaned against the metal guardrail of the road leading out of the town. It sniffed the air again. The scent of dripping blood from the body being carried by the wind to its nostrils. The blood oozed to the ground in gentle streams, pooling beneath the person. The first was overzealous, the sight of fresh blood overtaking her and causing her to rush forward. A horrific, keening noise escaped from her throat. It was brought on by her bloodlust, and she fell on all fours and began to bound across the parking lot. 10 yards away, she bunched her legs beneath her, leaping into the sky. The jump was powerful, the arch taking her onto the body. But she flopped to the ground in a heap, the empty poncho wrapped around her gaunt frame. She wrestled with it for a moment, before realizing that there was no body. Breathing heavily, she began to sniff at the poncho and the blood. It dripped gently into her hands, and she held it to her face. She sniffed again, before licking it from her fingers, her companion cautiously moving towards her, wary of their surroundings. Something in its animalistic brain told that everything was not what it seemed, but the world was quiet. So the monster began to move forward. The first bullet thundered through the parking lot, the sound bouncing off the empty building and the mountains in the distance. The bullet slammed into the female, piercing her heart and exploding out her back in a shower of black gore. She hit the ground hard, her head cocked at a strange angle, without even time for a death rattle to escape her lips. The male stopped, his brain unable to comprehend what had just happened. Understanding finally dawned on him too late as a second bullet roared through the growling light, piercing his thigh, spinning him roughly around and throwing him to the ground. He reached out with his claw-like hands, struggling to get away. Getting to his feet, he began to move forward on all fours, but a third round slammed into his lower back, taking a chunk of his side outward and away. An animal scream escaped his throat as he fell to the ground, still struggling in a pool of his own black blood. 70 yards away, the hunter rose out of the woods. His camo net fell away from his body as he worked the bolt on his rifle again. He stared down the scope for a moment, watching the tree line in the distance, scanning the world around him for movement. Minutes passed as he waited, the only sound being the snarling and whining of the creature below. Finally satisfied, he began to walk forward. He came to the first body, still wrapped in his blood-soaked poncho. The trick had worked. It lured the beasts in. With utter contempt, he spat at the gore-soaked corpse of the creature as he passed, hatred flaring in his eyes. It didn't take him long to reach the second monster, who continued to squeal as it tried to pull itself to safety. The hunter kicked the creature over, seeing the look of fear in its eyes before he knocked it out with a booted kick to the face. He stared around for a moment before reaching down and beginning to drag the body towards the safety of the gas station. The creature awoke some time later. The world had a painful haze to it. The faint rays of sunshine through the boarded windows illuminated the ruined interior of the gas station. Garbage and debris were scattered along the grimy floor, and the shelves had been haphazardly pushed around to create some form of a barrier or obstacles. The monster tried to shift, but its body was racked with pain. It looked down. It let out a low whine as the blood was pooling beneath it slowly. But the bleeding had nearly stopped. It was already starting to heal. It looked up as the sound of boots approached it, and the hunter appeared. He moved slowly through the store, his combat boots crunching gently on the stale potato chips and the old candy. He stopped, staring into a long, empty drink cooler. "I dragged your ass into this place so that we could have a chat," he said, speaking gently, his voice scratched as if he hadn't spoken in a while, with the faintest hint of madness. The creature began to struggle. It tried to stand, but was met with the clink of the chain that was wrapped around its body, and it began to snarl, it began to growl, trying to frighten the human. But the hunter turned to it with almost a bored look on its face. The creature, it began to struggle, trying to stand. "I don't expect us to have a long, drawn-out conversation," he says, turning around and walking forward again. He grunted with pain as he sat down on an overturned display case. "But I expect you'll tell me exactly what I want to know," he continued. He reached behind him, drawing the long knife from its sheath at his back. Fear returned to the monster's eyes as it stared at the weapon. It knew what it was. It knew what it was used for. Its brain hadn't forgotten everything from its past life. It opened its mouth again, working it up and down, drool and blood, flecked spittle dribbling from its mouth. The hunter cocked his head to the side with fascination as the monster continued. "Tell you nothing," he groaned, his eyes flickering back to the hunter's, and he stared at it for a moment before nodding and standing up. "Didn't think you'd still be able to do that. Been a long time since you've probably spoken." "Kill you," the monster growled, finding its voice. The monster began to flail wildly, its wounds already beginning to heal more. It thrashed against the chains until it finally gave up, breathing heavily. The hunter walked away, staring out into the bright world beyond the barricaded windows. He scanned for a moment, but once again he didn't see anything. He glanced back over his shoulder. "Do you hope for things?" he asked suddenly, and the creature cocked its head, not understanding the question. The hunter turned and walked back towards it. "I had a dog, a long time ago, who you could tell hoped for things," he said, almost speaking to himself. The hunter begins to pace back and forth. "I'd be making dinner, and you could tell that he hoped that I would give him something to eat. Or you could tell that he'd stand by the door and hope for a walk or play," he says, looking back at the creature, pointing with his knife. "You're a little more than animals." He crouched down only a few feet from the monster. "You're smart, you're cunning, you're dangerous, and you remember more than you think you do about what you were before. But you're animals. Your lives, such as they are dedicated to your next meal. It drives you," he says, standing up, walking away again. "But are you hoping for your next meal? Or is the drive merely built into whatever your brain has become?" But he turned back, walking forwards again. He crouched down once more. But this time he rears his hand up and brings the knife down into the monster's leg. A blood-curdling shriek escaped its lips. You and me, we're gonna have a nice, long talk. And when I'm done, I guarantee you're going to hope I end you as quickly as I did your friend outside. The screams didn't echo throughout the valley until the sun began to sink once more behind the shelter of the mountains in the distance, and the fog thickened into the night.